up and talks, I want to just speak to you, because while this is a grand project and it really is a kind of iconic sort of thing to do, it also is very similar to what many of you do. I mean, you are nature lovers, are you not? And in this particular town, particularly in the surrounding regions, what I've noticed is there's a huge interest in conservation. Is there not? I mean, this is really important because while Laura and I have had this opportunity to do something grand, it reminded me of what President Kennedy once said. One person, isn't that how it goes? One person can make a huge difference, but everybody should be trying. And when we look at our city, at the conservation efforts that are done here, that's exactly what it reminds me of, is people are planting trees, they're making little parks, they're volunteering. By the way, I want to acknowledge those who did this last Saturday, volunteering in their community. We had over 1,000 people that volunteered. This is actually what we need to do. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Michael, because he works his butt off, I guess is the way to say it, for this, has not been a newcomer to conservation, nor to the California coast. He's a distinguished conservationist in ocean geography, and now has taken on this huge responsibility. Michael?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Bell. And I wanted to mention that this is actually the first time that we're presenting this project in a complete way in any public forum. And so thank you so much for your interest in it. And the reason I mention that is I think you should have really modest expectations on how good my presentation might be this evening. There's a place in California called Point Conception, and it's where two ocean currents collide. Cold water from Northern California mixing with warmer water of Southern California. And it's this dynamic that's partly responsible for what is an incredible assemblage of biodiversity in the marine realm here, as well as in the terrestrial realm. On Point Conception is a 25,000 acre intact ranch property, formerly known as the Bixby Ranch. It has 8 miles of coastline that is on both sides of the point. It is truly the last coastal wilderness we have in Southern California, and it's a place that conservationists have long called the last perfect place. The Fred H. Bixby acquired this property in 1918 and ran it as a cattle ranch pretty much with minimal development for about 100 years until 2007, when the Bixby family got larger and they decided to sell the property. And the decision was made to sell the property to a partnership made up of a developer and a hedge fund. So all of a sudden things didn't look so bright for California's last perfect place. And people, this worried people, obviously. People really love this place. In fact, so much so that there's people kind of do anything to get on its beaches. There's a lot of trespassing. Case in point. These folks were so bold to take a picture of themselves after they snuck on the beach. Okay, the real story is that Jack and Laura reached out to the Nature Conservancy about 2 years ago, and the Nature Conservancy had been interested in protecting this amazing natural area for a long, long time. But we had no idea that Jack and Laura had their own vision and their own dream of preserving this place permanently. And after speaking with them quite a bit, what I learned is that they spent their honeymoon in a pup tent just down the coast from Point Conception. And that was a moment. That was a moment in nature that a dream started. A dream of them helping to protect this amazing natural coastline. From that point forward, Jack, Laura, and I, and a few other people talked quite a bit about how we might work together to protect this place. In our conversations, we talked about the ecological attributes of the property and the risk of fire and the likely purchase price. And it was going on for quite a while, but it changed when one call came in, and I remember it distinctly. It was October of 2016, and Jack called, and he said, you know, Michael, if the Nature Conservancy had the money. How would you handle negotiating an agreement on purchase price? I didn't think anything of the question, just another conversation we were having. And I shared that, well, our team has learned a lot about the landowners and the property, and I gave him my perspective, my approach on how we should handle negotiations. And Jack responded and said, I agree with you completely, and I think that's the right approach. And if you can get a deal within that price range that you just mentioned to me, Laura and I would like to fund the entire purchase price. So I dropped the phone, I picked it back up, and I politely asked Jack to repeat himself. And it was true, that's what he said. And so it was really, a truly amazing moment. And it was a long story what happened from that phone call to where we got today, but it ended happily on December 21st when the Nature Conservancy bought the entire 25,000-acre Bixby Ranch for a purchase price of $165 million, representing the largest gift ever to the Nature Conservancy, and most importantly, resulting in the Jack and Laura Dangermond Preserve. So I'm going to talk a lot about why this place is so special and our efforts, the Nature Conservancy's efforts, along with many partners, including Esri, to create a world-class nature preserve out here. But I wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit about why these protected, intact representations of nature are so important to us. In conservation, we talk a lot about the need of protecting the suite of species and habitats that exist in nature, and that's true, but there's even a larger value. Nature really contributes to the human experience on Earth, and we've seen that happen in so many places. Gombe National Park is a place that Jane Goodall observed chimpanzees and learned how they ate and hunted and had social behaviors that were so much like humans. She transformed our understanding of our closest relative in the animal kingdom, and therefore transformed our understanding about ourselves and our place in the natural world. And this came out of inspiration and opportunity in this natural place. The Galapagos, obviously, is where Darwin observed finches and turtles and created a pivotal moment for his theory of evolution. Again, transformational in how we think about ourselves and the world around us. Again, all made possible by this place in nature. The place in nature that was most influential in my life is a lake in northwest New Jersey called Culver Lake. It's a place that my Irish immigrant grandparents retired to, and so I therefore spent all my summers hiking and swimming and fishing in this place, and I fell in love with it. And I now realize that the observations and the experiences that I had in nature there set the path for my career and really the rest of my life. In 1951, a group of scientists formed a new organization, and they raised $7,500 to buy a 60-acre tract in the Mianus River Gorge on the border of New York and Connecticut. The name of that organization was the Nature Conservancy. And in the decades that followed, the Nature Conservancy became the largest conservation organization in the world. And when you think about our history, everything that we've accomplished, all the millions of acres protected, the conservation laws now on the book, the science developed, everything we've ever done really came from the inspiration that this group of scientists drew from this place in nature, the Mianus River Gorge. So a big outcome here is the preservation of an incredible representation of nature, obviously. But what's even more important about this moment is the future potential, how this place will inspire us, how we will learn from this place, the discoveries that can be made there, how it can change how we think about ourselves. And when it comes to thinking about the values out on the Jack and Laura Dangermond Preserve, there are many, and it really depends who is the eye of the beholder to determine what is the most important thing, and therefore how do we manage this place to protect those values. A lot of different opinions. The ecologist perspective is very much based in some of these stats: 54 species, special status species, 14 of which are threatened and endangered. That is an absolute stunning portfolio of special status species on one property. These are a couple of them. The Lompoc yerba santa, it's a plant, obviously, that exists, it is endemic only to the Dangermond Preserve and the neighboring property to the north, Vandenberg Air Force Base. Western snowy plover is a federally endangered species that's highly dependent to find nesting grounds on intact and undisturbed beaches, something that's fairly rare in Southern California. But the more fundamental perspective from the ecologists that we work with is that this place is very different. Animals are behaving differently here. Shorebirds are congregating in really high numbers. Bears and mountain lions still range the entirety of the preserve, including the beach. We have marine mammals that are using the nearshore environment and resting very close to the beach here, and the intertidal zone is incredibly diverse and intact. The ecologist perspective is basically that this is the closest thing we have to a representation of what a coastal wilderness looked like before the impact to man here in Southern California. The marine ecologists would focus quite a bit on that dynamic of these two currents mixing and what that has created. Surveys of fish and marine mammals and whales and sharks tell us that this place is incredibly productive right offshore, and this is definitely a very important site for marine ecology. So much so that when stakeholders came together to do the planning and designing for the Marine Life Protection Act, which established a series of marine protected areas up and down the coast of California, they decided to put a very large marine protected area in our state waters right off the southern boundary of the Dangermond Preserve. The far eastern extent of that marine protected area, if you draw a line straight up, is the property line. This is directly south of the preserve. And it's also a state marine reserve, which means it's the strictest regulation. It's actually a no-take, no fishing marine protected area. So the research perspective is that this is really an incomparable platform for the advancement of science. And there's so many themes that researchers are interested in. Of particular interest is climate change, how climate change will impact the natural communities that exist out here in this region, and also how we can change our own management of them to provide more resilience to the impacts we will definitely see with climate change. Then there's the original people of California. This is a map depicting where indigenous people lived in this part of California. And we know from the Chumash that this is a top sacred site, and it's very rich in archaeological resources. We also know that this was described as their western gate, a departure and entry point between their spiritual and material worlds. And finally, there's a perspective of the California coastal user groups and surfers. The property has 4 world-class surf breaks on it. I'm not a surfer or anything, I don't know. But there's been a tradition out there for people to access these places, these wilderness surf breaks, typically by boat from surrounding communities, and they're there for the day, and they have this experience out in the wilderness, and then they're gone. So a whole lot of different perspectives in what is most valuable and why the Dangermond Preserve is so valuable and how it should be managed. But I'd like to try something here and present another reason why this place is so valuable. And I'd like you to take a minute and recall a memory of being in nature, and not just any place in nature, but a place that is truly remote, truly pristine, the closest thing you can think of to wilderness. And now I'd like to ask you all, where were you? How many of you, by a show of hands, were somewhere in the mountains or somewhere in the deserts? Okay, that's almost most of us. But there's a reason for that. We've been pretty good at protecting nature in the mountains and the desert. It's a little bit harder to protect nature where we prioritize economic uses. This is a map created by the California Wilderness Coalition. It's a simple map showing protected areas of all sorts across California. And the question is, what's missing? Southern California coastline. It's one of the most biodiverse and interesting natural areas in the world. It's one of 5 Mediterranean ecosystems, coastal ecosystems in the world. And California really does have a great legacy and background in protecting our coastline. But here in Southern California, what we've done mostly has been creating parks. And there are some wonderful parks. Leo Carrillo and Crystal Cove State Park provide really important access opportunities and recreational opportunities for so many people. But in this really impressive portfolio and legacy of coastal conservation, what we haven't had is a big protected area of coastal wilderness, a place where we can really examine how the habitats and the plants and the animals behave before the impact of man, how indigenous communities lived there before. And we never had that, but now we do with the Dangermond Preserve. So this brings us to, I talked a little bit about why this place is so special, but this really brings us to how we should manage it. And that takes us to our vision. I've shared in the beginning that our vision is really to work with partners to develop a world-class nature preserve. But in the very beginning of this project, the vision of this place was incredibly important and dominated a lot of our conversations. And we worked closely with Jack and Laura and many other experts to think about what the right vision is for this place. And so we have a vision with 3 parts. And the first part, not surprisingly, is preservation and restoration. This last weekend, I had the chance to go to an event at the UC Reserve called Sedgwick Ranch in Santa Barbara. And there I met and got to talk to a local botanist who's since retired, but a famous guy who's done a lot of work in this region, really knows it well. And his first words to me were, "Congratulations, this is an amazing outcome that we never thought would ever happen." And his second set of words to me were, "Don't screw it up." So it turns out that "don't screw it up" is actually scientist speak for the fact that preservation of this incomparable natural area has to come first, and it will be the first tenet of our vision. And all proposed management activities, all proposed preserve activities will go through this fairly sophisticated decision-making filter of, is that going to screw it up? The second part of this, the sort of other side of the coin, the other side, the proactive side of the preservation coin is restoration. And this property is incredibly intact and in great condition, but there are many natural communities out there that have seen impact, and we already have a restoration specialist out there working with partners on many projects that will enhance its habitats and the biodiversity found out there. To no surprise, the second tenet of our vision is science and research. This place belongs to nature was something that Jack said while we were out there touring the property before closing, when I was out there with Jack and Laura, and I just remember that quote well, and we agree with him. It's like this place was made for research. There are so many potential themes and areas to go into. I think some of the top areas of research will be climate, as I mentioned. The experimentation with technology as a tool in monitoring and managing natural resources will be a big focus area, and having Esri as a partner really helps us there. And I think a third area is the coastal interface. We have this extraordinary set of conditions that we have protections from the ridges of the Dangermond Preserve all the way down to the beaches, to the reefs, to the kelp forests, all the way far into the nearshore community. There's not many places in the world that have that set of conditions. And advancing our science and research work is more support from Jack and Laura to the University of California at Santa Barbara. And through Jack and Laura's support, they are establishing a new endowed chair position that will be our research partner there at the University of California. And that's under design right now. It's very exciting for the future of the preserve. And the third area, the third component of the vision is environmental education. The Dangermond Preserve can play a huge role in cultivating the next generation of leaders that conservation needs and the know-how that these leaders need to really tackle the most challenging problems facing our environment. We want to be strategic about this. The conservation movement has a need, and that need is to have more diversity, to have more inclusiveness. And a well-structured environmental education program at the Dangermond Preserve where we target students from very diverse backgrounds and provide them with outdoor educational opportunities on the preserve in these inspiring environments can go a long way in helping us do that. So those are the three tenets of our big vision for the preserve. And one thing I've noticed on the job is it impossible to do all those three things at the same time? There's almost a conflict there, right? On one hand, we're saying we want to preserve this place in perpetuity and preserve this natural and this wilderness area. On the other hand, we're saying let's get a lot of people out here and create some educational opportunities and advance really cutting-edge research. So the answer in how we do that really lies in smart conservation planning and geodesign. And we've set out the goal to have our first version of a preserve management plan within 18 months of closing. We closed on December 21st. And using the tool of geographic information systems, we can, and through our preserve management planning process, we can start really looking at pieces of information like where the sensitive habitats are, where the fire risk is on the property, where the current infrastructure is, and where future infrastructure may need to go. And there's a whole lot more when it comes to these data layers, and these are just for illustration purposes, but you can start to see that when we overlay these things, put them together, we can start to get a whole picture of what's going on the preserve, start thinking about zones of sensitivity and where a specific proposed preserve activity should go and where it shouldn't go. The development of that management plan and the implementation of its guidance will very much be a group project. The Nature Conservancy will not be able to carry out this vision and build this world-class preserve without a lot of help from partners. We're already hard at work with Esri and the University of California at Santa Barbara. The Land Trust for Santa Barbara County was actually on the property yesterday, working with our team and thinking about how they contribute to the management plan. And maybe one day the University of Redlands will also be on this list. So it's very much a big partnership project. So I described a little bit about the property and why it's so special, our vision, and how we go about thinking and planning for that vision. But I realized it doesn't really answer the question of what this place will look like. And so for that, I'm going to try something I've never done before, which is to tell you an entirely imaginary tale. A day in the life of the Nature Preserve 5 years from now, May 2nd, 2023. Now, everything I'm about to say is made up, but it's all based in in the direction of our planning process and the information we're getting and the partnerships we're making as part of this project. So on this morning, 5 years from now, at 9 a.m., a school bus arrives with scientists from the Nature Conservancy and our environmental education partner, Nature Bridge. And it has on that bus 30 high school students from all over Los Angeles. And they're heading to the center of the preserve where there is the Halama barn. It's a barn that's actually 118 years old. Spectacular, really spectacular structure. But recently it's been renovated into an environmental education center. It has a commercial kitchen, It can sleep up to 70 people. It has a center and a meeting room, and has a laboratory. Now, these students will spend the night at that center, but they'll be preparing for a 2-day hike through the preserve. And that hike will start at the low areas, the stream corridors, and the riparian areas of the preserve, and then they'll have a chance to walk through every natural community that exists on the preserve. They'll move through open grassland, rangeland, and into coastal chaparral, and then up the ridge into a coastal live oak system. They'll camp overnight on top of the ridge, and then they'll do the same thing in the morning, but they'll work their way downhill, moving through the same natural communities, but in reverse, until they get to the real reward of the whole trip, which is the beach, of course. And at the beach, they'll see one of the best places. They'll be at one of the best places in California to observe what's going on in our tide pools and our intertidal systems, and to see gray whales migrating by, blue whales, all sorts of marine mammal life. While they're on the preserve, there's a good chance they'll run into one of the 7 research teams out there. There's one team in particular that's a group of botanists and remote sensing experts, and they're mapping the range of a manzanita species, which was just discovered on the property 2 years ago. It's an endemic species only to here, and like the other plant at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And what's really cool about the work these researchers are doing is they're entering their information in real time to the preserve's data portal. In fact, all researchers, all monitoring on the preserve, is entering their information in real time to the data portal. You have researchers tracking mountain lions. You have researchers monitoring great white populations offshore. You have imagery coming from kelp forests, imagery coming from coastal live oak forests. This and much more is part of this massive collection of data. And this portal is something that's been called a digital twin. And by having this digital twin, researchers and students can tap into this thing, log on from anywhere in the world, model the preserve, ask questions, use it for educational purposes. Somewhere else on the preserve, restoration experts from the Nature Conservancy and Vandenberg Air Force Base are together working on a long project to remove ice plant from the preserve that's dominated in certain areas and restore a native and dynamic dune ecosystem. And then finally, I hope you can see this picture, it's a little dark, out on the point is a docent-led hike. It's a bi-weekly docent-led hike program. This one happens to be hosted by our partner, the the Museum of Natural History in Santa Barbara. There are 40 participants here. Many of them are coming from their camping sites just next door at Halama Beach County Park, and they've jumped on the bus and joined this tour. When they're out here on Point Conception, they'll have a chance to hike a loop trail and see whales and really observe what's going on in the marine environment here. They'll also have a chance to go into the restored historical lighthouse here, which is now an interpretation center for the natural history of the Dangermond Preserve. So that's a day in the life, 5 years from now. And everything I've just described is something that the Nature Conservancy and its partners are making strides towards every day. We're getting closer and closer to making this kind of very alive preserve a reality. And in closing, I just wanted to say in my role as the lead of the transactional part of this project, and now my role as the director of the Dangermond Preserve, I've had the enviable opportunity of getting out there and exploring some of its most beautiful corners. And it is a very, very inspiring place. It's really mind-blowing. But I think the most impressive part of the project thus far has been people's reactions to it. People's reaction to this vision, an incredible act of generosity from Jack and Laura, and this conservation outcome that no one thought possible for so long actually coming to fruition. And it should be inspiring, right? It should inspire all of us. And like Jack said, it should inspire us as individuals to do more, to deliver a healthier planet to the next generation. And we can all do more, whether it's composting or donating to our favorite conservation organization, or if it's volunteering, or if it's carpooling. There are things we can do. There's ways we can step up. So in closing, I think it's important that we let this act inspire us, and we let this outcome inspire us, let that inspiration lead us to meaningful action, and then let that action inspire more. Thanks so much.
We are going to take some questions, and I think we have 2 students to help with the mics. So if you would raise your hand and tell us who you are, they will bring you a mic. There's one right there.
Mine's a really quick question. I'm Nancy Sadhu, and you mentioned Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Yes.
And that was your 5-year in the future image. Is that one of your partners now?
They are. I would say they are one of our partners now. It's important that we have a very good relationship with the Vandenberg Air Force Base next door.
I think so.
So Vandenberg's really interesting. It's massive. It's over 100,000 acres. And they do a lot there to manage all the natural attributes on that place. And there's a big conservation team there. So we're already working with them and thinking about restoration projects that we could do together. There's some weed problems that are on both sides of the border, so we can work on that. We could come up with better ways to manage the rangeland together. So they're very much a partner, and it goes very deep in terms of how we'll work with Vandenberg. And they're excited that we're here. They're thrilled. It's mission success that this place will be protected forever.
And I just want to make one comment, because where I grew up in Connecticut, we were very close to the Mianus Gorge. So it was lovely to see that. We did call it Mianus, not the way you were. Yeah. And I don't know if they've changed the pronunciation or what.
No, I just can't pronounce it. That's all.
Hello, my name is Sally Richards. I noticed at the beginning of your program you mentioned the indigenous tribes that had found meaning in this area. I'm wondering if they still have some presence there, and if is there anything that's happening to preserve their area of special spiritual experience?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There are several bands of the Chumash in the area, and yes, they're very present and active in the community. We've met with them and consulted with them several times. We're doing restoration work where they will be consulted on every step of the way, and they have the opportunity to really monitor any work that has any ground disturbance. It'll be that's really has to be a resource that comes first. As one of the representatives from the Seni Nez band told me, said, "Michael, we're caring for non-renewable resources here." And it was a really interesting and profound point and a way to think about it. So yes, it'll be very much a part of the plan, and we hope to have a very good working relationship with the Chumash people.
I have a question. You told preservation and restoration. What exactly restoration means? Like, how does it work? I know preserving wilderness makes sense, but restoring, it means you are modifying something in there.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in restoration, we imply that we are taking direct action to modify what is currently there in this natural community. So we have a dune system that has really become a monocrop, and it's just this ice plant species. And what's remarkable about it is if you travel, and I'm sure Jack and Laura experienced this as well, but if you travel from the point where that ice plant is up the coast road to where it's dominated by chaparral and a more native vegetation type, all of a sudden you start seeing raptors in the sky. You see them everywhere, hunting around, and there's prey moving around in this chaparral. In the ice plant, you see nothing. You'll see vultures, but you won't see any other sort of activity happening with wildlife. And so we're getting that out of there. and it's actually pretty difficult. We're starting with 300 acres. We're working with the California Coastal Commission on that project. But maybe your question also touched on what do you restore it to? You're nodding your head, so and that's a very good and provocative debate happening in the world of conservation. Is what's your baseline? What do you restore a system to when you take on restoration activities? I am no expert, and I think there are systems where it's a bit of a no regrets, obvious thing where we need to remove ice plant and get more native diversity here. And I think there are other occasions where it's harder to determine what you're restoring to, what your baseline is. And with climate impacts moving as fast as they are, it becomes even more difficult to make that determination. So I'm sorry I don't have an exact answer for you on that question, but I think we're on safe ground with the ice plant.
How many of you have ice plant in your yards? It's great, isn't it? It's so beautiful, purple, lovely stuff. I mean, my parents and my family, my brother sold flats of it to Redlanders. It's a great species.
Did they ever work on Point Conception?
No, they didn't go up that far. Laura and I traveled from San Diego north last weekend, and we just saw how it's pervasive along the coast. So it's become a kind of like naturalized plant. And while that's beautiful and we enjoy it, it's not going to do any good for the native species. So we have to remove it. So those of you who have time and maybe need a bank covered with ice plant, we'll get you volunteering out there.
Absolutely.
It's not hard. There'll be tons of it. There'll be square miles of it practically. It is our vision that we can return this to more or less a natural ecosystem. What does that mean? It's kind of like everything's been altered, and what is real true native state? It's kind of hard to say. Climate is changing. And also this ranch has had over 100 years of ranching. I mean, productive ranching, thousands of cattle that the Bixby's really ranched. And I mean, your vision is to maintain some of that, but some of it has impacted the natural plant life that's there. So how do we find a balance there? It's one of the challenges that Michael and his team are going to be wrestling with. Because in fact, cattle have a huge positive impact in terms of fire reduction in the oaks. And Michael, you didn't actually mention it, but there's probably, my estimate, there's probably 1 million oak trees on this preserve. So let's talk about the big, beautiful oaks in Redlands. Aren't they beautiful? On Buena Vista and so on. Those are only about 100 years old, 120 years old. The ranch has trees on it, by my estimation, that are 200-300 years old, 400 years old.
Yeah.
One of them that had a trunk on it as wide as between Michael and myself. And it's just like some people appreciate the sequoias. They go, they're this ancient forest and they're beautiful and they're iconic. If you get into the inner part of this ranch, there's that kind of ecosystem operating with these, hundreds of thousands of year, evolution of the oak forest with hundreds of year oaks. This is actually what charmed Laura. She said, these have to stay. I mean, that was sort of, oh, wow. I re-fell in love with her when she said that. This has got to stay.
Yeah.
And we were deep in this was like 14 years ago, driving around in a Jeep, trying to find our way. And there's something spiritual about being in a place like that, where nature is still totally in control, and you have thousands and thousands and thousands of years of evolution that got us to that particular state. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have any other stories to tell about your experiences being out on the ranch? I mean, we haven't talked very much.
Yeah,
You've been living there and living
more through the transaction than since the transaction. It's there's been amazing experiences out there, and I think maybe some of the most profound for me has been in interacting with people. And I mentioned it earlier, but their reaction to all of this and their feelings about this place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different perspectives. And this was the premier cattle ranch in Santa Barbara County. This was this is a big part of the cattleman's culture. This is an amazing place in that regard.
It was like Redlands with oranges. I mean, basically, that's the way to think of it. Is it was and historic. I mean, that family.
And the history of that, and that's a big value for them out there, and how they think about this place. And it's very important that we incorporate that into our preserve management process and think about that. And so there's the recent history, the Spanish American history out there. There was activity out there during World War II. There was a monitoring site for potential Japanese invasion. There's the Native American history. Artists, something totally different. Artists have the Bixby's allowed artists on the property year after year. There's something called the Oak Group, perfectly named, which is a collection of artists that get out to some of the most beautiful places, create these incredible paintings, and then auction off those paintings, and with the proceeds, donate the money back to the conservation group working on that protected area. And it's incredible. It's a fantastic program. We haven't had them out yet, but they're chomping at the bit. And there's some artists that you really need to meet, Jack and Laura. They're just incredible, and some of the work they've done out there is.
He's going to hit me up to sell one of these paintings. I see it's coming. This guy he's almost as bad as our lovely host this evening. If you guys know what I'm talking about. Okay, I won't go there.
So I would say that to answer your question, it's been the people's reaction, and I think it's not been all good news in the world of conservation and environmentalism recently, and I think people are just so thrilled to see something big like this happen, and it's very motivating, very inspiring. So that's been.
Other questions? In the back. Yep.
Hi, my name is Barbara Spriggs, and my question is, when you're talking about restoration, is what are you going to do with the buildings that are on the property, and how many buildings are there?
Yeah, we didn't touch base on that at all. There are two ranch headquarters. So the ranch was traditionally known as two ranches, the Halama Ranch and the Coho Ranch, and it was Fred H. Bixby that bought them and put them together. So the Halama and the Coho. On the Halama, there's a headquarters. On the Coho, there's a headquarters. On the Halama, there's the headquarters. There's a big, fantastic old barn, again, 118 years old. And then there are about 5 old residential structures, all suffering from deferred maintenance, significant deferred maintenance. So there's a lot of work to do out there. So that's what's on Halama. On the Coho, are about the same amount of residential structures, no large barn. 2 of the structures are adobes. And again, a lot of work needed across the board. So the plan is to use what we have. There may be some day where there's a thought of building something new, some sort of interpretive center or something else, but these are early days in this work, and so the thought is very much to use what we have and to do the repair work and the improvement work necessary on all these beautiful structures. Some will be used for an office. A lot will be used for the staff housing out there. That'll be the biggest use of many of these structures. But some will be set aside for visiting researchers, a host of different purposes.
My name is Mason Einhorn. I'm with the Redlands Conservancy. I'd just like to point out that the first 4 questioners were outdoor ambassadors with the Redlands Conservancy. So we are here with a presence. And I just want to make the point that this seminar had one of the biggest turnouts. It's being shown on YouTube and everything. And just to bring up the point that we do have the Redlands Conservancy here in Redlands that has 600 acres that are dealing with all these issues, from Native American history to restoration. We have our own barn. We're developing an education center. We've acquired these 600 acres, but now the work becomes maintaining them. One, to maintain the resources and the finances, but also to develop a community coalition to get the resources together, to keep these properties beautiful the way they are and to continue restoring them. So if you're as interested with the Dangermond Preserve, we have all these issues and all this dynamics going on right here in Redlands. Trails and restoration and invasive species. We don't have the ice plant, we have Russian thistle. So getting hands on the ground and getting people out there would be wonderful. This is beautiful, but we have this little microcosm in our own backyard. So I would encourage you to come out and enjoy that.
Thank you. The question I had is whether you envision the land continuing as a working cattle ranch. Can that be potentially a continuing revenue stream to help support the Conservancy, and would the Bigsbys continue to be involved in that regard?
So no on the last part. They sold the property 10 years ago, and they're sort of moved on to other things. On the first part, I think the answer is yes, but that will be tested through our planning process and through our decision-making sort of year after year. A big component of the natural systems out there is open rangeland. So a couple things here. One is cattle help us with fuel loads. A lot of these rangelands, when cattle's pulled off entirely, get very weedy very fast. We can even get Russian thistle there, as well as all the other thistles. So it's an issue. There are some great researchers in this region from UCSB and from other places that have really looked into this question of what's the best way to manage these rangelands. And this Michael Benedict, the gentleman I mentioned, the botanist I mentioned that said don't screw it up, it spent his whole career working and researching this question, and he's a huge proponent for high-intensity, fast-moving grazing. This area he describes had a grazing pressure and a population of ungulates grazing rangeland that was greater than anything you could ever see on TV in Africa. There was always been grazing pressure in these areas and on these grasslands. And so there's a lot of experimentation. Well, how do you mimic that? How do you move from sort of lazy grazing to moving animals around quicker, creating impact, moving them off it, letting that grassland recover? So I think it'll be an area of research for us, but I do see it staying. It is also part of the culture, part of the history that helps. You do have a ranch hand team that are fantastic, and they're very connected with the place. Our ranch manager is a guy by the name of Justin Coda. He was born on the ranch next door. His dad worked on this ranch. He worked on ranches in the whole area. He goes and helps them with their work, and when it's time to round up cows on this property, they come here. So there's really a very interesting history there. But in the end, the place is a nature preserve. That is its goal, to be a world-class nature preserve.
Michael is not explaining is the culture of the ranch. I mean, it's like going back to the 1860s, because Justin and his hands are living like in the 1860s. They all have their own horse, they have their own saddles, they ranch. Can you imagine? Like, we all fantasize about this going back and watching a cowboy western. That's what it was like when Laura and I first went there. It's like being in a frontier land.
Yeah.
Hours away from civilization, these guys live their little existence, ranching. And I don't know if I can really emotionally get this across so you get a sense of what it's like to be there. It's not just the nature. There's also this whole ranching culture It's, of course, it's dying out in America and around the world, but it was intriguing. Maybe you're going to change all of that.
I don't think so.
Get rid of the horses,
Yeah, I
chase
don't
all of them
think so.
away. No, it's intriguing. Well, one last question.
Hi, my name is Raka Wajdashek. I actually work here. And before I ask my question, I just want to say thank you again. That was the best Christmas present ever, to receive that email that made the announcement. And so I guess my question is, both as a geographer and as a First Nation person, this, I feel like from what I've heard from my colleagues from other companies, when they saw the announcement, like on LinkedIn, it sparked a conversation. And I'm wondering, are there plans to make this almost like an example or a use case to maybe spark more individuals like yourselves to invest in conservation? I kind of think about Yosemite, like that sparked something for our federal government to start setting aside land. And if our climate doesn't change, having more individuals step up to see the value of setting aside land for all the reasons that you talked about, do you think that that might be something in the future, or is that something that you're already thinking about? I'm just really excited, and again, thank you. But I really hope that this might be an example and maybe a pathway for others to follow suit who are capable to do that.
Well, I have a comment, you have a comment. I'm sure you do. We like not to be very public about anything we do like this. This was a conscious decision and a big one. And of course, this is our little fortune here going out. We decided, largely because of Laura, to say we should make a footprint out of this so that other people copy it. I mean, it's hard to come up with a new idea. It's easy to copy. It's sort of something that humans do, right? We all do that. So our hope is, and aspiration is, that this sets a footprint for the sort of Silicon Valley types, that they get really active into conservation. So that's one of our big agenda items. I'm saying this in before you really speak, Michael, because you've seen directly and indirectly the results of going public. I mean, we heard last week or 2 weeks ago from Sean, he was here. He also made a conscious decision to go public in his philanthropy and his work in conservation. And it's a big decision. And both of us talked to Sean before we did it, because it's not exactly our style. But in this particular case, we did it for exactly the reason that you're talking about. So, have you seen any copycats?
Well, one thing just struck me while you were talking is, can you imagine they didn't? You can imagine the Nature Conservancy just let this news out there, and the people that made it possible didn't go public. I mean, what an incredible loss. I mean, there's been such a reaction to this, and the biggest reaction is the act, the vision from you and Laura, and so I just couldn't imagine. To your question, I just couldn't imagine if that wasn't part of this story. And yes, there has been a lot of positive repercussions of this, and
what
waves.
he's saying is there's been millions and millions flowing into TNC.
It's going to cost millions and millions to do this, and send some to the Redlands Conservancy as well. You know, it's a big job, and fundraising has gone fairly well, and I can't think of a conversation I've had with a potential donor who didn't start with saying how inspired they were by the gift. But I do think there's going to be a big impact from this.